back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidir, and we're going to be kickstarting off the show with a hard look at our tax system and public service value, a topic that hits all of us deep in the pocket. According to Efficient Group's chief economist, Dawie, Roodt, South African taxpayers are receiving less than 5 cents in value for every 1 rand they pay. And we'll be asking a very, very important question this morning. Why this sharp discrepancy, and why is the pressure in the system? And most importantly, what must change? He's joining us via a virtual platform for, I think, a very, very important conversation. Dawie, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you here on Salam Media. Good morning.
Good morning. I can't hear a thing. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to hear something.
Okay. Are you? There we go. There we go.
Now I can hear you. Okay, now I can hear you. Apologies. Okay.
I think there was a bit of a lag, but let's jump right into it. You've said that for every 1 rand paid in tax, a typical high-income household here in South Africa gets less than 5 cents in return. How did you arrive at that figure, and what assumptions went into that calculation?
Yeah, it's not too difficult to do. In fact, anybody can do that. And maybe just a bit of a background. Remember, if you look at the budget of the Minister of Finance, he takes a lot of money from us and he takes it from various sources. The most important revenue source to the Minister of Finance is personal income tax. That's approximately 40% of his total tax stake, followed by value-added tax. That's approximately 30%, roughly speaking, and about 20% comes from company taxes. And a couple of smaller ones like the so-called sin taxes and the fuel levy and so on. So that's where the Minister of Finance gets his money from. Where does the money go to? Well, he spends it mostly on things like, for example, education, the most important expense item, and then on interest on state debt and various social expenditure items and in defense and police and things like that. That is where the money goes to. So now we know where the money comes from and where the money goes to. So if you take the total expenditure of the Minister of Finance, or then the total revenue or tax burden of the Minister of Finance, and you divide it by the number of people in the country, let's say about 65 million, you will find that the Minister of Finance takes 40,000 rand per individual out of the economy. So the per capita tax in South Africa is approximately 40,000 rand. Now from there, it's quite easy to calculate. So for example, if I've got a household of 4 people, per capita GDP or per capita tax is 40,000 rand. That means 160,000 rand. That is the tax that the average 4 household pay, for example, to the Minister of Finance. But of course, everybody doesn't pay exactly the same. In certain households, for example, some people earn much more, and therefore their personal income tax is much higher. So you have to adjust for the personal income taxes, and you will find that a household with a 2 million income, for example, they don't pay 40,000 rand per individual. They pay much more. The same goes for value-added tax. Rich people spend more on things, and therefore they pay more for VAT, for example. Company taxes are also paid by individuals in the end, and you can, depending on your assumptions, you can make adjustments to that, and I think you see what I'm trying to get to. You can calculate, and you can get a little bit closer to the actual. Go and have a look at your tax return every year, and you see this is what I pay in personal income taxes. But that's not all. You also pay VAT. You also pay the fuel levy. You also pay company taxes and things like that. So depending on your assumptions, depending on from household, how many people in a household, you can actually get very close to your actual tax that you pay to the Minister of Finance. So that's the one side of the equation. The other side of the calculation is to see where the money goes to. Now, again, if you look at a high-income company, a high-income household, they don't make use of the state's medical fund, for example, state medical services, because they've got their own medical services. So you don't get the benefit from that. You also don't get the benefit from, say, example, the various grants. So you have to deduct that as well from your 40,000 rand. You also don't get the benefit of many other things, like, for example, school, the education, because you send your kids to a private school, for example. So you have to make all these kind of adjustments to what you get from the state. And then it's a simple exercise. I pay so much and I get so much. And what is the rand in, rand out ratio? I can just tell you, I made a bit of a ridiculous assumption. And my assumption is that if you put 1 rand into the system called the state, then 1 rand pops out on the other side, which is not the case. The state is highly inefficient and there's a lot of wastage in the state. But anyway, So I've done a calculation, and it really depends on what income category you're talking about, how many people in the household, and so on. But roughly speaking, if you've got an income of about 2 million rand annually, one working adult, one non-working adult, and two kids going to a private school, for example, then for every 1 rand you pay tax, you get significantly less back, less than 5 cents back for that. Or put differently, a 2 million rand family, income family, in my example, for example, will carry the expenses of approximately 20 poor families. So if that rich family pays for education and health services and grants and stuff and so on for approximately 20 poor families. So it really depends on who you are. So the wealthier you are, the more your income is, the more you pay, the less you get. And the poorer you are, the less you pay and the more you get.
Very, very interesting, I think, observation there. One thing that really stood out, and I think it ties in with your last point, is the fact that only around 978,000 people, which is roughly 1.5% of the population, pay more than 60% of all personal income tax here in South Africa. What does this say about the sustainability of the tax base in South Africa? How long can we carry this through?
Let me give you another number. I told you that company taxes are probably about 20% of total tax to the Minister of Finance, and there are 1,000 companies that pay 70% of all the company taxes. But you're right, a very few individuals pay just about all the personal income taxes. And that means that they are carrying a very, very, very heavy burden. And I think part of the function of the state is to take from the rich and give to the poor. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, I guess. But we are completely overdoing it in South Africa. And if you keep on taxing the rich people to the extent that we are, then the rich people will do certain things. They will emigrate, and many of them leave the country. And those rich people are the productive people. So they will go away, and they will go and make money some in another country where they either pay less taxes or get more back from the state. So they emigrate. That is one thing that they do. But not only do they sometimes emigrate, the rich people are the people that do the savings in the country because they are the guys with the money. So, and if you keep on taxing them, then they have less money to save. If you don't have enough savings in the economy, you cannot invest in the economy, cannot grow as well. So I think the point I'm trying to make, we must understand that the rich people are very important to us. They are the guys carrying the fiscus. They are the guys quite often that is the main engine of economic growth, savings, and all those sort of things. Look after our wealthy and our rich people. We need them.
But Dawie, how do you respond to, assumptions that the wealthy are not even taxed enough as it is? There are people that contend that there's extreme inequality in South Africa, and it necessitates a wealth tax to increase government revenue and to hold the wealthy more accountable.
Yeah, I've just given you some of the numbers. So what is very, very clear is that the fiscus in South Africa is highly redistributional. It's probably the most redistributional fiscus in the world. With I can tell you now, we cannot increase the wealth anymore because we're losing them, and we are over the so-called Laffer curve and so on. But the approach of reducing inequality in South Africa is completely and totally wrong. We want to reduce inequality by making the rich poor. That's not the right way of reducing inequality. The way to reduce inequality is to make the poor rich. That's a better approach. And you make the poor rich by putting the right measures in place to get this economy to start growing faster. So reduce inequality, yes. By reduce inequality, not by making the rich poor, but making the poor rich.
But then with such pressure on a tax-paying minority, which is very, very small and is shrinking by the day, you continue to mention that raising income tax further is also not a possibility. So if income tax hikes are off the table, what other options are left for the state to maintain or expand revenue? I saw, yesterday the Minister of Finance celebrating over, SARS and how much they collected this year. What other options are there? What more can we do?
Well, of course, we can try to increase certain taxes. Income taxes is not an option. We can try to increase VAT. VAT can get us a little bit more, but it's politically difficult tax to increase. We can give more money to SARS and SARS is extremely aggressive as it is. But unfortunately, the reality is that this SARS, an efficient and effective SARS, takes money away from the productive side of the economy, the private sector, and gives it to the unproductive side of the economy, and that's the state. The state is very unproductive, inefficient. So yes, we can try to squeeze more out of the economy, but the price we're going to pay is weaker economic growth. The answer to your question is, and there's only one answer: we must put measures in place to grow the economy faster. And in fact, we have to reduce the tax burden as well. So we need a more efficient state, certainly. Not necessarily a more efficient SARS. I'm not very happy with that. They're doing a job, and I'm not saying we should evade taxes. That's not what I'm saying. Everybody needs to pay their fair share, but this is not fair. That the rich people are overtaxed in South Africa, and we need to grow the economy faster and expand the tax base to get more people to pay. And then more people can only pay if the economy is stronger and more people are actually successful financially in the economy as well. So grow the economy is the only real sustainable answer.
Well, there you go. Dawie Roodt, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media, and for those very, very important insights.
Thank you.
There you go. That was Efficient Group Chief Economist Dawie Roodt. Yeah, I think giving us a reality check. South Africa's tax-paying households and businesses are facing an uphill battle. And I think when you look at it in numbers and in true lived reality, the fact that for every R1 that you spend on tax, you only get 50 cents worth in return. What are your thoughts on this? You can engage with us. Our studio line is 0116800355. On WhatsApp, 061-766-0355. What can the government do to continue to, I don't know, kind of raise money instead of overly taxing a small tax base? I mean, 1.2, 1.3% of the population is paying over 60% of tax. We can all agree that at this point is very, very unsustainable. But what can we do? What other options are there? Which other sectors do you believe should and need to be taxed? Is it sin tax? Do you think there should be more tax on that? Or should be looking at other ways, whether it's multinationals coming from overseas? Must we raise, business income tax on that a bit more than we already are? Are there other avenues? Because it's simple, ordinary South Africans can't anymore. The tax base is just too small and is stretched. And with the high cost of living, you can only imagine just how many, families are already struggling with tax. I mean, 1.3% having to cover 60% plus of the tax base. It's impossible. It's unsustainable. As I mentioned, you can engage with us on our various social media pages, and we'll read out your suggestions on what more can government do, what kind of further implementations can be put in place to make sure that we collect money, because it is needed. At the end of the day, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. There must be a balancing act between the haves and the have-nots. You have some of the most wealthiest people in the world living here in South Africa, and you also have some of the poorest people. So I think at some point there needs to be an equilibrium which is met that's sustainable, and I think that works for all parties. We're going to take a quick break. News and Views continues after this.